In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both the royal family and the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were actually in better appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding, about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters that were in all of his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. This is God's word. Well, if you don't do any Bible reading this week, we just read a whole chapter, so you're good, right? We got our Bible reading in for the day. Daniel's an incredible book, and it really spans a life, and it focuses in on a ministry of Daniel, who serves under 3 world powers. He serves for 50 years, being kind of batted around by Babylon, then the Medes and the Persians. And what we see is this incredibly enduring, durable model for what it looks like to be faithful when the conditions are not favorable. Have you ever had something happen in your life that was so catastrophic? You know, it really was such a crisis to you that your loyalty to God was in question? Now, many of you might not have had something like that. Many of you might not have had something like that happen yet, and yet some of you have. Some of you have endured an incredible catastrophe of sorts, maybe just an incredible loss of health. You know, one year you were healthy, but then month after month, suddenly your health is they just decline, and it's happening at a rate that is just not understandable. The doctors don't understand. They can't put a finger on what's going on, and you just feel completely out of control. Where is God when all of this is happening? I know some of you have lost someone that when that person was gone, you looked in the mirror and you didn't even hardly recognize yourself because you were so tightly knit to maybe your husband or your wife or your child. And you might have put on a nice face, but down deep, you were asking some really hard questions. Some of you, I know, actually, you've told me without me asking, you've told me about a marriage that was lost. You know about the time when your wife left because there was a better man, and she took the kids with her. And you didn't come to church for about 18 months because you were asking some really, really hard questions. But it was almost like a chasm had opened up before you, and you were like, what difference does it even make if I believe in God? What difference does it make if I go to church? It was such a spiritual catastrophe, you didn't even know what to do. And you didn't even want to come and have to explain yourself, talk about it. It's just going to bring it all back up. I know some of you haven't been through something like this. I know some of you haven't been through something like this yet. And I know some of us, we've been through something like that. It's kind of a heavy start to the sermon, isn't it? So let's take a deep breath. That's where Daniel starts. A spiritual catastrophe has happened, not just at a personal level, but at a national level. Something has happened that is so grave, so catastrophic. There's been such a breach between God's people and God himself that God, if you've been here for the last several weeks, we've been looking at the richness, the complexity, the nuanced nature of his character, right? That he can be loving and faithful and just and slow to anger, yet does punish sin. What we see in Daniel is that character at work. Because the Bible's not just some dry theological treatise, it's a story. And so what we see in Daniel is the story of this incredible God, this loving God, this just God, acting out, living out his character with his people that have run out on him, with his people who have gone after lovers, with his people who have put their trust in someone besides him. And so what God does is what God always does. He's loving, he's kind, and he's faithful. He's faithful to do what he said he would do, which was the promise of the curse in Deuteronomy 32 through 34, which says, if you trust me and love me and follow me, I will bless you and protect you, and I'll give you a land, and I'll give you a nation, and I'll bring you king. I'll make you the pride of the world. And if you don't, for my own reputation's sake, I will still be faithful to my end of the covenant, and I will punish you. Not because I want to, but because I'm faithful and I'm loving and I'm jealous, and I will be true to my word, even if you're not true to your word. So if you don't stay faithful to me, I will bring up a rival nation, I will send you into exile, and I'll repeat that cycle that we see in the very opening chapters of the Bible. Right? What we see when Adam and Eve disobey God in Genesis 3 is exile, taken from the garden, and they live forever east of Eden. And we see this same cycle happening again with the people of Israel. Time and time again, God has sent the prophets. Return and be faithful to God. Return because God wants to bless you. And if you aren't faithful to the covenant, to the promises you said you would fulfill, God's going to send you into exile. Not from the garden, but from the land, from Israel. And so the cycle goes on again. And that's where we pick up. Notice, it gives us the historical context, and Daniel gives us layers here. There's a historical context to what's happened in this exile with Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. This is a very historically documented fact. This isn't just some story. Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC, while Jehoiakim was king of the southern kingdom of Judah, came and levels Jerusalem and brings it to the ground. Notice, that's the historical context, verse 1. But notice verse 2, there's a theological context, because it wasn't just that Nebuchadnezzar said, that little stretch of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, it's one of the most prized pieces of land for any world empire, particularly in the east part of the Fertile Crescent, because all the major trade routes, everything from the Mediterranean has to go right through that little strip of ground. And any king, they've been fighting over that little piece of ground then. We're fighting over it now. Any king that has the next several kings, whether it's Nebuchadnezzar, whether it's Darius, whether it's Xerxes, in all the major world powers, that is the piece of ground they want. And they take it. That's the historical context. But notice Daniel, the Bible doesn't look at world events just from a historical angle. It says there's also a theological angle. There's a God angle. There's a God context. And that's what verse 2 is about. It's not just that Nebuchadnezzar wakes up one morning and goes, I'll take that piece of land. It's that God is faithful to his promise and raises up Nebuchadnezzar, causes Nebuchadnezzar, even though he might not even be aware of it, he's using Nebuchadnezzar to discipline, to chastise, to judge his people for their unfaithfulness to him. And that's why verse 2 is very important. Notice that it wasn't just Nebuchadnezzar in all of his power and might and design and intention. What does verse 2 say? God gave. And God gave, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. It's a frightening thing, isn't it, when God gives us what we want? We've talked about from Romans 1, the repetitive theme of us in our sinful, broken, deviant ways, not wanting God. The repetitive theme in Romans 1, Paul uses the word 3 times, and God gave them over. God gave them over. It's a frightening thing to be given by God Almighty what we want. And it's not just to judge or to punish. It really is an act of love. It's an act of saying, I'm not going to force my hand on you. I'm not going to force you to love me. I'm not going to force you to be faithful to me. I love you. We have a covenant. We have a promise. I have to be faithful to my end. If you don't want to love me, I'm not going to force you to do that. And Israel didn't want to do that. And so he gave them what they wanted. And unfortunately, what they got was a leveled city, a lot of death, and exile. And in very standard form, Babylon wasn't the only one that does this. In very standard form, when a world power decides they want to extend their kingdom, they do it in a couple of ways, and it's a very standard practice. There's power, and there's assimilation. Do you hear what I'm saying? There's brute military force. We will come in and take it because we want it and we claim it and it's ours. That's one way to extend your kingdom. But it's not the only way. And I would say it's actually not the most powerful, insidious, effective way. Because right behind power is assimilation. Is as we're extending our kingdom, we might not kill you. We'll just say, come, pledge your allegiance, take all of our blessings, become a part of our kingdom, reject your former identity, say no to who you were, because that's not who you are anymore. Become a part of our kingdom, take on our customs, become like us and enjoy all you have to do is worship Marduk, not Yahweh. All you have to do is worship the king and not Yahweh. That's all you have to do. And you can see how incredibly tempting. Death or a nice home with a vineyard and a small herb garden and an income and a job and severance and pay and retirement. But all you have to do is burn incense at the altar to Marduk. It's why in the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, the empire Rome is both envisioned as a beast that comes and devours God's people, right? That's Revelation 12, this beast that emerges out of the sea and just takes out anything in its path. And then a couple chapters later, what is Rome envisioned as? What is she imagined as? But a beautiful harlot, tempting, full of lust and desire, and saying, come be with me. It's this incredibly powerful, provocative image of Rome saying, come and drink of all of my sweets, take in all of my blessings, all of my wealth. It's repeating this very standard pattern: power and seduction. Power and assimilation. And that's exactly what Babylon is doing. That's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar's doing. Notice that assimilation program in verses 3 through 7. Right, the king commands his royal officials, his eunuchs, to take the best of the best, right, the royals, the most influential people, because don't kill them, bring them in. We can use them, right, and brings them into their assimilation program. Change their names, change their diet, run them through Babylon University, right, give them a good, solid university education, assimilate them, change them, make them like us so that they can serve us. And that's where Daniel just says, I'm not going to do it. What he does is he draws a line in the sand. He draws a line in the sand because though you can't really see it in the story, you can't get inside Daniel's head, I think what's happening here is Daniel can see that his loyalty is in jeopardy. His loyalty to Yahweh is in jeopardy because everything that for him is a signpost to God, his name even ends with the word God. His entire identity, his name, his diet, his land, everything that he knows, his education, the Hebrew scriptures, all of it, all are markers, all are signposts going to Yahweh. And yet what he does is he sees the allure, he sees the seduction, he sees the assimilation. He's getting a new name, he's getting a new diet, he's getting a new education. He's getting a new high-rise apartment in a beautiful place overlooking the palace. And he sees, and I think is scared by the fact that he sees the possibility that over time, his loyalty is going to be compromised. And so he doesn't reject all of it, but he does draw a line in the sand. And where does he draw that line? He draws it around his diet. This isn't by the way, not a promotion for like a vegan diet versus a carnivore diet. This is not like where we prop up an all-vegetable diet because that's God's blessed diet. And this is not a prescription for the Daniel fast or the Daniel diet, right? Which I know a lot of pastors have gone way off the deep end on. That's not the point. The point is, what Daniel has done is he said, if I can't figure out how to stay loyal to Yahweh in these ways, I have to hang on to something. I have to draw a line somewhere. And so what he does is draw a line around a diet that will honor God according to the diet that was given in the Torah, the law. And so he says, I am going to honor you there, Lord, because if I don't draw a line in the sand, I know eventually my loyalty will be in question. I might abandon you forever if I don't do something to say, no, I'll accept that, but I will reject that. And so he draws a line in the sand around his diet and honors the Lord with a diet that is kosher, that matches what the Lord prescribed in the Old Testament. And what you'll notice in my printing of Daniel 1, it doesn't really come through in the English translation, but it jumps out of the page in the ancient original in the Hebrew. Notice verses 7 and 8, the three words that I've highlighted in green. It says, and the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Now, you'll notice that in English, each of those three words, gave, called, and resolve, are different. But in the Hebrew, it's the same word. In Hebrew, it's the word to set. You set your intention. You make a decision. You draw a line in the sand. You drive a post in the ground. What that means is like this. This is how it would read. And the chief of the eunuchs set them names, not just gave them names, they were setting their identity, locking it in. Daniel, he set Belshazzar. You are no longer Daniel. You are Jason Bourne, right? That kind of a thing. You are Belshazzar. Let go of this old identity. This is being set for you. But notice what Daniel does, and this is what Daniel wants us to see. But Daniel set. Daniel set that he would not. He said, okay, no. I have to hang on to something. I have to draw a line somewhere. At the potential cost of his life, at the potential cost of the royal official overseeing his life, I had to be careful to not chuckle or add commentary to when the official says, "Why would you endanger my head with the king? If we change your diet, that could cost me my life." This is not just, when you're under somebody's thumb, it's not about preferences. You do what you're told. And Daniel knew when he said no, it could cost him his life. But see, what Daniel was doing was he was realizing that if he didn't draw a line somewhere, his loyalty was in jeopardy. He could have lost everything. Every other marker he had, you think about it, when you go to a place, if you travel abroad and you're in a place that you don't know the language, you don't know the people, you don't go to your home, you just feel kind of like, this isn't me. I don't know who I am when I'm, in another country and I don't know the language and I don't have a place to stay because you're so deeply embedded in, that's where the light switch is, and this is where the laundry soap is, and these people know me when I go to this cafe. Your identity is so deeply entrenched. But what if all of that was ripped away? What if everything was taken? You'd say, who am I? Daniel's at that point, and not just Daniel, the entire nation is at a place going, who are we? Who are we without our land? Who are we without the temple? Who are we without the covenants? Who are we without our name? Who are we? And Babylon says, you're ours now. You're no longer Israel, you're Babylon. And what Daniel is saying is, no, there is a king in Babylon. Against all odds, against everything he can see, everything he knows, he's grabbing for a rope in the storm. He's drawing a line in the sand because he sees that his loyalty is in jeopardy. He sees that it's very powerful to have a military might come in and just stomp everything out. It's actually more powerful, more seductive for them to offer you the world and more if you'll just become like them. And he sees his loyalty slipping. And he draws a line in the sand. And you'll notice what God does. You notice how we've highlighted another set of words, verses 2, 9, and 17. What does God do? Well, you'll notice verse 1, verse 2, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, the Lord gave his own people to be punished and judged. God punishes covenant unfaithfulness. He does. We've been talking about that for the last couple of weeks. He's just, he's righteous, he's faithful. He punishes covenant unfaithfulness. But if you notice the next two gaves, he honors covenant faithfulness. So while he punishes covenant disloyalty, he also honors Daniel. He honors these four. These aren't the only four Israelites in the noble court. I find that my wife pointed that out to me the other day, and I hadn't noticed it. She said, there's probably a lot of Jews that aren't doing this. There's a lot of Jews that are going, you know what, the name, the food, the whatever, just give me a job and give me a place to live and let me live out my days. And what Daniel's showing us, but there's a handful of them who are saying no. And God honors that. God punishes covenant disloyalty, but he honors covenant faithfulness, even at the high cost of what it might cost, whether it's your life or anything else. He honors covenant loyalty. It says, when Daniel asked for this, it says, God gave Daniel favor, right? Gave them favor. How do you get more plump, more robust just by eating vegetables? You don't. The point of this is not eat a better diet and you'll look better, though that does help and work. The point is, God honors this in some sort of a miraculous way, right? They're not eating all the choice meats and drinking all the best stuff. They're eating less, and yet they look better. God has honored their covenant faithfulness. He honors their covenant faithfulness by giving them an advanced education beyond what the teachers in Babylon University are teaching them, so that they're able to do things that other leaders, other nobility from Israel are not able to interpret dreams, able to understand things that the magicians, the enchanters can't. God honors covenant faithfulness in the midst of a process where you're being tempted to be disloyal. Around the world, a lot of our brothers and sisters are being challenged at a very deep level, not by assimilation, but by power. They're saying Christianity is not legal. It's not allowed. There's no assimilation about it. It's just sheer power. If you do this, you're in jail. Some parts of the world, a lot of parts of the world, if you do this, you die, right? So the threat is real in that sense. The power struggle is real. And yet in a lot of other cultures, our brothers and sisters and us are being challenged by a much different force, not so unlike Babylon. You guys know we live in Babylon, right? You guys know that we're not being tempted away from God by power and force, but every day from the moment we wake up to the moment we go back to bed, Babylon is alive and well. You know that in the book of Revelation, this very image is used of Rome. It says, Babylon, Babylon, the great whore. Very striking, provocative image. See, Babylon is this archetypal sort of a baseline illustration and image of a world cultures, world powers that don't seek to pull God's people away by power, but by assimilation. Just changing the way you think, changing the way you value things. Very subtle in the way that it's saying, oh, no, you can go to church, but think like us, talk like us, watch the same YouTube channels as us, spend your money like us. Why has it been throughout the history of the church in the Western world that the primary criticism is we don't look any different than them? It's because we've been assimilated and we don't even know it. And that's why it's so insidious, so dangerous. And Daniel says, no. I'll go to your schools. I'll eat where you eat, but I'm going to eat a different diet. I'll take on the name. Yeah, I'll go to Babylon University, but when I go to the cafeteria, no. He draws a line in the sand, and God honors him for it because he knows that if he doesn't draw a line in the sand, his loyalty is in jeopardy. So let me ask you, where do you need to draw the line in the sand? First of all, you need to come to grips with the fact that you and I live in a culture that is assimilating us, that we're constantly in a sea or a river that we're drifting in. Not toward God. Walk out into our world. We're not drifting toward him. Our culture's been slowly and steadily drifting away. Where are you going to, this metaphor is getting all mixed up. Where do you draw the line? How do you paddle upstream? Where do you draw the line in the sand? Because you see that your loyalty is in jeopardy. Sometimes it might be something that you actually do. It's not, in this case, it's something that was done to Israel because of their unfaithfulness, right? Sometimes it's things that we're doing that we just know. We go, I'm doing the church thing. I'm going to maybe even to a Christian college or not or whatever. I'm going to U of O and yet when that phone comes out, your disloyalty, whatever you do on that phone, and you just go, but this is my little thing. This is my one little place. And in your heart of hearts, it's driving a wedge between you and God. You know that it is. You can see that you're playing this role here or this role here. And your loyalty, whether you know it or not, is actually being jeopardized. Some of you I know, I was going to bring a bottle of Jack Daniels or, like a big Coors Light, but I thought, that's probably not a good idea. It was going to be empty, but I know that for some of you, just the sight of it would make you start to sweat. Not because of how it could potentially cause you to be disloyal. It has caused you disloyalty in the past. I know that a lot of us have addictions, some of us maybe even right now, that for you know that if you don't draw a line in the sand around something that to me might not be a problem, but to you could cost you everything. You go, if I do not draw a line in the sand it could cost me my loyalty to God. Some of you, and I was going to maybe bring a pair of flip-flops up here. Some of you have such a desire, such a quest, such a need to live a life of leisure and ease, to always make sure everything is financially sound and secure, that your primary goal in life is retirement. Or if you're retired right now, your primary goal is to not let anything shake that retirement ease that you worked so hard for. And that thing is so important to you that when the kingdom comes to bear and the king says, I want you to consider this, you say, oh, no. For you might need to see that a part of our assimilation culture is you live for the last 20 years of my life, because those are the golden years. And I'm just telling you, that could be one of the most dangerous lies you're ever told. I just got off the phone with my uncle, who I haven't talked to in 20 years. And my uncle, incredibly successful. It was so fun to talk to him. I haven't talked to my Uncle Fred in years, and it was just great to hear from him. And I said, how's your health? And then 20 minutes later, he said to me, Marcus, the golden years aren't so golden. Please hear me. I'm not saying retirement's bad. I hope that when I'm 65, I'm not running at the pace I'm running right now. I won't have it. I'm starting to sense that. Why does that hurt now? It didn't hurt 5 years ago. It hurts now. And I know a lot of you are like, oh, just wait, kid, give it 20 years. I know that. But what I'm saying is don't buy the lie. The lie might be for you that you're hoping for a life that in 5, 10, 20 years, or the life right now you're going, God, nobody can touch this, not even God. And I'm just here to challenge you. Maybe that even is a line of disloyalty. Do you see that it could be anything? Do you see that for each of us, for all of us, we all have things that our culture is saying, just take this. Yeah, go to church, do your thing, but just take this. Just become like us and it'll be fine. And for all of us, it might be a different thing, but if you don't draw a line in the sand somewhere, even seeing that we live in Babylon, that might be for you the first time we've even heard this idea, that we live in a world that is trying to assimilate us. And if you don't recognize that, and if you don't know and aren't aware of some of the soft spots, some of your tendencies, some of the things that if you entertain them will eventually bring your loyalty to God into question. It'll jeopardize it. Where do you need to draw the line in the sand? I want to encourage you to get your communion elements out. We're going to take communion together because if we think about Jesus' story and life, the cross, the garden, the cross, death itself, in that way, it's really a sobering thing to consider, isn't it? That there was only really one person who felt the full weight of obedience, full loyalty. And it cost him everything. He was challenged and tempted to be assimilated, challenged and tempted to default in all kinds of ways for his entire ministry. And every time he drew a line in the sand and he said, no, not here. Or yes, this is what God wants. And what we really celebrate together as God's people is that God punishes covenant unfaithfulness and he honors covenant faithfulness. Where better do those come but the cross? He's punishing our covenant unfaithfulness and he's honoring Jesus' covenant faithfulness because in 3 days he's going to be raised. And Jesus knows that, and yet it costs him everything. So let's take some time. Let's remember the incredible cost, the incredible joy, the severity, the love, all of it as it comes together in the cross. Let's take communion.